The screech of brakes pierced the afternoon air like a wounded animal's cry. 8-year-old Marcus Thompson looked up from his green plastic triceratops, confusion clouding his dark eyes as 3 police cruisers surrounded School Bus 47. The yellow vehicle, moments before filled with children's laughter and after-school chatter, fell silent except for the nervous rustling of backpacks and whispered questions. "Everyone stay in your seats." Officer Davidson's voice boomed through the bus doors as they swung open with mechanical violence. His hand rested on his weapon holster, muscles tense beneath his Navy uniform. Behind him, 2 more officers flanked the entrance, their faces stern masks of authority that seemed far too serious for a school bus full of third-graders. Marcus's small fingers tightened around his dinosaur toy, the same one his grandmother had given him for his 8th birthday 3 months ago. The plastic creature had 3 small horns and painted green scales that caught the light filtering through the bus windows. It was his favorite possession, a companion that had traveled with him through countless adventures in his imagination. "We received a report of a weapon on this bus," Officer Davidson announced, his eyes scanning the rows of confused children. Some began to cry softly, their small voices creating a heartbreaking symphony of fear. "We need everyone to cooperate fully." The bus driver, Mrs. Rodriguez, a kind woman in her 50s, who had been driving school routes for over a decade, stood slowly from her seat. "Officer, these are just children. There's been some mistake." "Ma'am, please step aside. We have our orders." Officer Davidson's tone left no room for argument. He moved down the narrow aisle, his boots heavy on the rubber flooring, while his colleagues began directing children to place their hands on their heads. Marcus watched in growing terror as the officer approached his seat near the back of the bus. He shared this seat with his best friend Jamie, a freckled boy with sandy hair who was now crying quietly, his shoulders shaking with each sob. The 2 boys had been talking about their weekend plans just minutes before, debating whether to build a fort in Marcus's backyard or practice skateboard tricks in Jamie's driveway. "You," Officer Davidson pointed directly at Marcus, his finger steady and accusatory. "Stand up slowly. Keep your hands where I can see them." "I didn't do anything wrong." Marcus's voice trembled, barely above a whisper. His grandmother's words echoed in his mind. "Always be respectful to grown-ups, baby. Always use your manners." He stood carefully, his dinosaur still clutched in his right hand. "Drop the weapon immediately." The officer's shout startled everyone on the bus. Several children screamed, and Jamie burst into full tears, his face red and streaked with moisture. "It's just my dinosaur," Marcus said, holding up the green plastic toy. "See, it's not real. It's just a toy my grandma gave me." Officer Davidson's hand moved closer to his weapon. "I said drop it now." The plastic triceratops fell to the bus floor with a hollow thud that seemed to echo through the stunned silence. Marcus raised his small hands above his head, mimicking the position he had seen in movies but never imagined he would need to assume himself. His lip quivered as he fought back tears, determined to be brave, even as his world turned upside down. "Turn around. Put your hands behind your back." The cold metal of handcuffs clicked around Marcus's thin wrists, the sound sharp and final. The cuffs were too large for his small hands, sliding down toward his palms, but they held firm enough to restrict his movement. As Marcus was led off the bus, past the faces of his classmates frozen in shock and terror, he caught sight of a familiar figure standing across the street. Karen Whitman stood beside her pristine white SUV, her blonde hair perfectly styled despite the October wind. Her arms crossed over her chest with an expression of grim satisfaction. She was speaking animatedly to another officer, gesturing toward the bus with dramatic hand movements. Marcus had seen Mrs. Whitman many times before. She lived in the expensive neighborhood adjacent to his grandmother's modest street, and her son Tyler was in his class at Jefferson Elementary School. Tyler, a pale boy with perpetually serious eyes, rarely spoke to Marcus or any of the other children who lived on the wrong side of the district lines. The morning had started like any other Thursday in Marcus's 8-year-old life. He had awakened to the smell of his grandmother's cooking, the comforting aroma of bacon and eggs that always made their small kitchen feel warm and welcoming. Grandma Evelyn had been humming an old spiritual while she worked, her voice rich and soothing as it filled their 2-bedroom house with music. "Morning, baby," she had called when Marcus shuffled into the kitchen, still rubbing sleep from his eyes. "I made your favorite breakfast. Got to fuel that growing brain of yours." Marcus had grinned, showing the gap where his front tooth had fallen out the week before. "Can I take Rex to school today?" He held up his triceratops, already knowing the answer, but asking anyway. "Course you can, sweet pea. Just don't lose him like you did that little car last month." Grandma Evelyn had ruffled his hair affectionately, her weathered hands gentle on his head. She worked 2 jobs to support them both, cleaning offices at night and stocking shelves at the grocery store during the day. But she always made time for their morning ritual. The day at Jefferson Elementary had been unremarkable until lunch recess. Marcus and his friends had been playing dinosaurs near the swing set when Tyler Whitman approached their group. Tyler rarely interacted with Marcus's circle of friends, preferring to stay close to the handful of children whose families lived in the same affluent subdivision as his own. "That's a stupid toy," Tyler had announced, pointing at Marcus's triceratops. "Dinosaurs aren't even real anymore. Only babies play with them." Marcus had felt his face grow warm with embarrassment and anger. "They are too real. They just lived a long time ago. My teacher said so." "Your teacher's wrong, and you're wrong. Give it to me." Tyler had reached for the dinosaur, but Marcus pulled it away quickly. "No, it's mine. My grandma gave it to me." The brief tussle that followed was typical playground drama. Tyler grabbed for the toy again. Marcus held on tight, and both boys stumbled backward. Tyler fell onto the grass, more startled than hurt, but he began crying immediately. Mrs. Patterson, the playground monitor, had separated them quickly and sent them both to the principal's office. Principal Johnson, a kind man with gray hair and gentle eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, had listened to both sides of the story with patience. The resolution was simple. Both boys would apologize to each other and spend the rest of recess in the library, reading quietly. It was a minor incident, the kind that happened dozens of times each week at Jefferson Elementary. Marcus had forgotten about the playground conflict by the time he boarded Bus 47 that afternoon. He was excited about the weekend ahead, looking forward to showing his grandmother the gold star Mrs. Henderson had given him for his math worksheet. He had been practicing his multiplication tables every night, determined to master them before his birthday next month. But Karen Whitman had not forgotten. At 2:47 p.m., exactly 13 minutes after the school buses had left the Jefferson Elementary parking lot, Karen placed a call to 911. Her voice was breathless with apparent panic as she spoke to the emergency dispatcher. "I'm calling to report a dangerous situation on a school bus. There's a black child with what appears to be a weapon. He was threatening other children during school today. And now, he's on bus 47 with that weapon. Someone needs to stop that bus immediately before someone gets hurt." The dispatcher, trained to take all threats seriously, especially those involving children and potential weapons, had immediately dispatched 3 patrol units to intercept the bus. The officers received a description of Marcus and were told to treat the situation as an active threat. Karen had followed the police cars in her SUV, claiming she wanted to ensure the safety of all the children involved. She watched with cold satisfaction as the officers surrounded the bus and extracted the dangerous child she had reported. Now, as Marcus sat in the back of a police cruiser, his small frame dwarfed by the adult-sized seat, he stared through the window at his classmates being questioned one by one. The officers were searching every backpack, every lunchbox, treating each child like a potential accomplice in some imaginary crime. His plastic triceratops lay forgotten on the bus floor, stepped on, and kicked aside as the officers conducted their thorough search. The toy that had brought him so much joy and comfort was now evidence in a case that would haunt him for months to come. Officer Davidson emerged from the bus after 20 minutes of intensive searching. He approached the cruiser where Marcus waited, his face showing the first signs of doubt about the situation. No weapons had been found. No threats had been discovered. Just a bus full of traumatized children and one plastic dinosaur. "Son," the officer said, opening the car door and crouching down to Marcus's eye level. "Tell me again about that toy. Where did you get it?" Marcus's voice was barely audible. "My grandma gave it to me for my birthday. It's just a dinosaur. I like to pretend it's real, and we go on adventures together." Officer Davidson studied the boy's tear-streaked face, seeing genuine confusion and fear in his dark eyes. This child showed no signs of aggression or deception. He was simply scared and bewildered by the overwhelming response to what appeared to be ordinary playground behavior. The radio crackled with an update from the officer who had remained with Karen Whitman. "Davidson, the complainant is insisting the child made specific threats. She says he told her son he was going to make him extinct, like the dinosaurs, and showed the weapon in a threatening manner." Marcus's eyes widened with recognition. "I remember now, Tyler was being mean about my dinosaur, and I said that dinosaurs were strong and could protect themselves. I wasn't threatening anybody. I was just standing up for my toy." The pieces were beginning to form a troubling picture in Officer Davidson's mind. But protocol demanded he complete the investigation. Marcus was transported to the police station, where he would wait for his grandmother to arrive. The other children were finally allowed to continue their journey home, but the damage had been done. Word of the bus raid spread through the community like wildfire. Grandma Evelyn Thompson received the phone call while she was stocking canned goods at Morrison's grocery. Her supervisor, Mrs. Chen, found her 20 minutes later sitting on a crate of soup, tears streaming down her face as she held her silent phone. "Evelyn, what's wrong?" "Honey," Mrs. Chen asked, genuine concern creasing her features. "They arrested my baby," Evelyn whispered, her voice breaking on the words. "They handcuffed my 8-year-old grandson and took him away in a police car for playing with a toy dinosaur." The drive to the police station was the longest 23 minutes of Evelyn's life. She gripped the steering wheel of her aged Honda Civic, her knuckles white with tension, while her mind raced through every possible scenario. She thought about her daughter, Marcus's mother, who had died in a car accident 3 years ago. She thought about the promise she had made at the funeral to protect and love that little boy with everything she had. At the police station, Marcus sat in a small room with Officer Davidson and a child psychologist who had been called in to assess the situation. The handcuffs had been removed, but red marks remained on his thin wrists. He answered every question honestly, his story never wavering from the simple truth he had been playing with his toy dinosaur when Tyler tried to take it away. "Marcus," the psychologist said gently, "did you ever say anything that might have scared Tyler, or made him think you wanted to hurt him?" Marcus thought carefully, his 8-year-old mind working through the events of the day with surprising clarity. I said that dinosaurs were strong, and they could protect themselves from bullies. But I was talking about real dinosaurs, like in the movies, not about hurting anybody. Officer Davidson made detailed notes while the psychologist continued her assessment. It became increasingly clear that Marcus posed no threat to anyone, and that the incident on the playground had been grossly misrepresented in Karen Whitman's emergency call. When Grandma Evelyn finally arrived at the station, she moved with the determined grace of a woman who had faced many challenges in her 62 years of life. She wore her grocery store uniform, having come directly from work, and her eyes blazed with protective fury, tempered by relief that her grandson appeared unharmed. "Where is my baby?" she demanded at the front desk, her voice carrying the authority of a woman who had raised 3 children and was now raising her grandson with fierce devotion. The reunion between grandmother and grandson was heartbreaking in its intensity. Marcus ran into Evelyn's arms, finally allowing himself to break down completely as her familiar embrace surrounded him with safety and love. She held him close, whispering reassurances while her own tears fell silently onto his hair. "I'm so sorry, baby. Grandma's here now. Everything's going to be okay." Her voice was strong despite her tears, projecting the confidence that had carried them through countless difficulties together. The formal investigation concluded 3 hours later. Marcus was released without charges. The incident officially classified as a misunderstanding based on a miscommunication. Officer Davidson personally apologized to both Marcus and his grandmother, expressing his regret that the situation had escalated so dramatically. "Mrs. Thompson," he said privately as they prepared to leave, "I want you to know that we take all threats seriously, but this response was disproportionate. I'm going to recommend that we review our protocols for situations involving young children." Evelyn nodded tersely. "Officer Davidson, my grandson is traumatized. He's going to be afraid of police officers now, afraid to play with his toys, afraid to stand up for himself. That woman made a false report and nearly destroyed my baby's sense of security." The drive home was quiet, except for Marcus's occasional sniffles. He sat in the passenger seat, buckled carefully into the safety belt, staring out the window at the familiar streets of their neighborhood. The normalcy of the suburban landscape seemed surreal after the chaos of the afternoon. "Grandma," he said finally, his voice small and uncertain. "Am I in trouble? Did I do something wrong?" Evelyn pulled the car over to the side of the road and turned to face her grandson directly. "Marcus Thompson, you listened to me carefully. You did absolutely nothing wrong. You were standing up for yourself and your property, just like I taught you. What happened today was not your fault." "But the police came. They put handcuffs on me. They must have thought I was bad." "Baby, sometimes grown-ups make mistakes. Sometimes they get scared by lies, and they don't stop to think clearly. But you are a good boy, and you always have been. And nothing that happened today changes that." Marcus nodded slowly, processing his grandmother's words with the seriousness of a child who had aged several years in a single afternoon. "Can I still play with Rex?" "Of course you can. Sweet pea, that dinosaur is yours, and nobody has the right to take it away from you or make you afraid to enjoy it." But when they arrived home, Marcus went straight to his room and put the Triceratops on a high shelf, out of sight. The toy that had once been his constant companion now felt dangerous, tainted by the day's events. He would not touch it again for many weeks. The following Monday morning brought new challenges. Marcus had spent the weekend clinging to his grandmother, reluctant to leave her sight even for short periods. The approaching return to school filled him with dread that manifested in stomach aches and sleepless nights. "I don't want to go back," he confessed over breakfast, pushing scrambled eggs around his plate without eating. What if it happens again? What if Tyler tells his mom more lies? Evelyn sat beside him at their small kitchen table, her work uniform pressed and ready for another day of early morning shifts. "Marcus, we can't let fear control our lives. You have a right to go to school, to learn, to play with your friends. We're not going to let one person's bad choices take that away from you." The return to Jefferson Elementary was indeed difficult. Many of Marcus's classmates had heard about the bus incident, and their reactions ranged from sympathy to fearful avoidance. Some children's parents had told them to stay away from Marcus, convinced that where there was smoke, there must be fire. Tyler Whitman was noticeably absent from school that Monday, and for the rest of the week. His mother had enrolled him in Riverside Academy, a private school across town, claiming that the public school environment was no longer safe for her son. The sudden departure spoke volumes about Karen's awareness that her actions would not stand up to scrutiny. Principal Johnson called Evelyn that Tuesday afternoon to discuss the situation. He expressed the school's regret about the incident and outlined the steps they were taking to ensure all students felt safe and supported. However, he also hinted at pressures he was facing from other parents who had been influenced by Karen's version of events. "Mrs. Thompson," he said carefully during their phone conversation, "there are some concerns in the community. Some parents are worried about violence in schools. They're asking questions about Marcus." Evelyn's voice turned ice cold. "Are you suggesting that my 8-year-old grandson is violent?" Principal Johnson, "Because I can assure you that Marcus has never hurt another child in his life. He was the victim of a false accusation. And now you're telling me the school is treating him like a threat." No, that's not what I'm saying at all. I'm just trying to navigate a sensitive situation. Marcus is a good student and a kind child, but there's pressure from the district office to address parent concerns. The pressure Principal Johnson referenced was coming primarily from Karen Whitman and her network of like-minded parents. Despite her son's absence from the school, Karen had launched a campaign to ensure that dangerous children were properly monitored and controlled. She attended school board meetings, started an online petition, and organized phone trees to spread her message of fear and suspicion. Karen's narrative was carefully crafted to avoid explicitly racial language while still achieving her desired effect. She spoke about children with behavioral problems, inadequate supervision, and dangerous toys that could be mistaken for weapons. Her words carried coded meanings that resonated with parents who shared her prejudices but wanted to maintain plausible deniability. At the October school board meeting, Karen stood before the assembled officials and community members with practiced confidence. She wore a navy blue blazer and pearls, her blonde hair styled in a perfect bob that framed her face as she addressed the microphone. "As a concerned parent and community member," she began, her voice carrying just the right note of maternal anxiety, "I feel compelled to bring a serious safety issue to your attention. Last week, a child on one of our school buses was found to be carrying what appeared to be a weapon. When confronted, this child became aggressive and made threatening statements." The audience murmured with concern, unaware that the weapon in question was a plastic dinosaur and that the threatening statements were the words of a confused 8-year-old trying to defend his toy. Karen continued her performance with growing confidence. "I've spoken with several other parents who have witnessed concerning behavior from this same child. There have been incidents on the playground, problems with aggression, and a general pattern of disrespect for authority. I'm not here to attack any individual child, But we need to acknowledge that some students require more intensive intervention. Board member Patricia Martinez, a Latina woman with 20 years of experience in education, raised her hand. Mrs. Whitman, are you referring to the incident that was investigated by police last Thursday? Because my understanding is that no weapons were found and no charges were filed. Karen's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Mrs. Martinez, just because charges weren't filed doesn't mean there wasn't a problem. Sometimes the system fails to protect our children. Sometimes dangerous situations are dismissed too easily. The coded language was not lost on several audience members, including Evelyn Thompson, who had arrived at the meeting after finishing her evening shift at the grocery store. She sat in the back row, still wearing her work uniform, listening to Karen's character assassination of her grandson with growing fury. When the public comment period opened, Evelyn approached the microphone with steady steps. She was not a polished public speaker like Karen, but she carried the moral authority of truth and lived experience. "Good evening," she began, her voice strong and clear despite her nervousness. "My name is Evelyn Thompson, and I'm here to talk about my grandson Marcus," though the previous speaker was apparently too cowardly to name him directly. The audience stirred at this direct challenge, and Karen's face flushed with indignation from her seat in the front row. Evelyn continued without pause. "Marcus Thompson is 8 years old. He's never been suspended, never been in a fight, never caused any trouble at school. Last Thursday, he was handcuffed and arrested because someone lied to the police about a plastic dinosaur toy." She reached into her purse and pulled out the green triceratops, holding it up for everyone to see. The small plastic figure looked absurd in the context of the formal meeting, highlighting the ridiculous nature of the entire incident. "This is the weapon that supposedly threatened the safety of our children. This is what caused 3 police cars to surround a school bus and traumatize 30 kids. This is what someone called 911 about, claiming my grandson was dangerous." The room fell silent as the full absurdity of the situation became clear. Karen shifted uncomfortably in her seat, realizing that her carefully constructed narrative was crumbling in the face of physical evidence. "Now," Evelyn said, her voice rising with righteous anger, "I want to know why the word of one parent is considered more valuable than the safety and dignity of a child. I want to know why my grandson is being treated like a criminal, while his accuser sits here making speeches about danger and violence." Board Chair Robert Chen called for order as murmurs spread throughout the audience. Some people were nodding in agreement with Evelyn's words, while others looked uncomfortable with the direct confrontation. Karen could not let this challenge go unanswered. She stood up from her seat, her voice cutting through the room with sharp precision. "Mrs. Thompson, I understand you're upset, but you weren't there. You didn't see your grandson's behavior on the playground. You didn't hear the threats he made." "What threats?" Evelyn demanded, turning to face Karen directly. "Tell everyone exactly what my 8-year-old grandson supposedly said that was so terrifying." For the first time, Karen hesitated. The actual words Marcus had spoken were innocuous, when repeated verbatim, and she realized that her interpretation would sound ridiculous to the assembled audience. "He said he would make my son extinct, like the dinosaurs," Karen finally replied. But even as the words left her mouth, she could hear how weak they sounded. A ripple of disbelief passed through the crowd. Several people actually chuckled at the idea that such a statement could be considered threatening, coming from an 8-year-old with a toy dinosaur. Evelyn seized on the moment. "So let me understand this correctly. My grandson told your son that dinosaurs were strong, using language that any child might use when pretending to play with toys. and you decided that this constituted a death threat serious enough to call the police. The meeting continued for another hour, but the damage to Karen's credibility was irreversible. Board member Martinez requested a full investigation into the incident and the response protocols that had led to such a dramatic overreaction. Other community members began sharing their own concerns about the climate of fear and suspicion that seemed to be targeting certain children unfairly. Dr. Sarah Williams, the district superintendent, announced that the school system would implement new training for staff and administrators on recognizing implicit bias and de-escalating conflicts between parents and children. She also promised a thorough review of the communication procedures between schools and law enforcement. As the meeting concluded, several community members approached Evelyn to offer their support and express their outrage about Marcus's treatment. Among them was David Chen, Patricia Martinez's husband, and a local attorney who specialized in civil rights cases. "Mrs. Thompson," he said quietly as the crowd dispersed, "I think you might want to consider legal action. What happened to Marcus was not just wrong, it was potentially illegal. False police reports are serious crimes, especially when they target children." The investigation that followed revealed even more troubling details about Karen's actions. Security cameras from the school showed the playground incident in full context, proving that Marcus had never acted aggressively toward Tyler. The audio was unclear, but lip readers confirmed that Marcus had not made any threatening statements. More damaging to Karen's credibility was the discovery of her internet search history in the days following the playground incident. Her browsing showed extensive research into police response protocols, emergency reporting procedures, and local news coverage of school violence incidents. The evidence suggested premeditation rather than spontaneous concern. Phone records revealed that Karen had made several calls to other parents immediately after the bus incident, spreading her version of events and encouraging them to support her claims of danger. She had orchestrated a deliberate campaign to damage Marcus's reputation and standing in the community. The most revealing evidence came from an unexpected source. Tyler Whitman, despite being enrolled in private school, had continued to play with several children from his former neighborhood. During a birthday party 2 weeks after the incident, he was overheard by a parent telling friends that his mother had gotten revenge on the black kid who wouldn't give me his toy. When this statement was reported to the investigators, Tyler was interviewed by a child psychologist in the presence of his father, away from his mother's influence. The boy admitted that he had been told to exaggerate the playground conflict and had never actually felt threatened by Marcus or his dinosaur. Tyler's father, Richard Whitman, was reportedly stunned by these revelations. He had supported his wife's initial concerns, but had not been aware of the extent of her deception. The interview with Tyler led to a complete breakdown in their marriage. As Richard realized that his wife had used their son as a pawn in her campaign against an innocent child. The district attorney's office ultimately decided to prosecute Karen Whitman for filing a false police report, a misdemeanor that carried potential jail time and significant fines. The charges were enhanced due to the involvement of children and the disruption to public safety resources. Karen hired an expensive defense attorney who attempted to argue that she had genuinely believed Marcus posed a threat. However, the evidence of premeditation and the systematic nature of her deception made this defense untenable. The prosecutor painted a clear picture of a vindictive adult who had weaponized the criminal justice system against a child. During the trial, Marcus was called as a witness, but the judge limited his testimony to protect him from additional trauma. Instead, the court relied heavily on the objective evidence, the security footage, phone records, internet searches, and Tyler's eventual truthful account of events. The community rallied around Marcus and his grandmother throughout the legal proceedings. Jefferson Elementary organized a dinosaur day, where students brought toy dinosaurs to school in solidarity. Local businesses donated to a fund for Marcus's future education, raising enough money to establish a college scholarship in his name. Perhaps most importantly, the incident sparked broader conversations about racial bias, child safety, and community responsibility. Parent education programs were established to help adults recognize and address their own prejudices. School protocols were revised to prevent similar incidents from escalating so dramatically in the future. Karen Whitman was ultimately convicted and sentenced to 6 months of community service, probation, and a substantial fine. She was also required to pay restitution to cover Marcus's counseling costs and the resources expended in the false investigation. The court ordered her to complete bias awareness training and prohibited her from having any contact with the Thompson family. More significantly, Karen faced social consequences that extended far beyond her legal punishment. Her actions had been widely reported in local and national media, making her the subject of widespread condemnation. She lost her job, her social standing, and ultimately her marriage as the community turned against her campaign of hatred. The civil lawsuit that followed resulted in an additional financial settlement that would fund Marcus's education through college and establish an anti-bullying program at Jefferson Elementary. The program, called Dinosaurs for Diversity, taught children about respect, empathy, and standing up against injustice. Marcus slowly began to heal from the trauma of his experience. With professional counseling and the unwavering support of his grandmother and community, he learned to process what had happened to him in age-appropriate ways. He eventually returned to playing with his Triceratops, though it took many months before he felt comfortable bringing toys to school. The following spring, Marcus participated in a presentation to the school board about the anti-bullying program. Standing at the same microphone where his grandmother had defended him months earlier, he spoke with the quiet strength of a child who had survived injustice and found his voice. "My name is Marcus Thompson," he said, his voice clear and confident. "Some people tried to make me afraid of my toy dinosaur. They tried to make other kids afraid of me. But dinosaurs were strong, and they survived for millions of years. I'm going to be strong too." The audience applauded. But the real victory was not in the recognition or the settlement money. It was in the sight of a young boy who had refused to be broken by hatred and prejudice. It was in a community that had learned to look beyond surface differences and stand up for justice. Grandma Evelyn watched from the audience, tears of pride streaming down her face. She thought about her daughter, Marcus's mother, and knew she would be proud of how their boy had grown through this challenge. The promise she had made at that funeral 3 years ago had been tested severely, but she had kept faith with her commitment to protect and nurture this precious child. As they walked out of the building that night, Marcus slipped his hand into his grandmother's. "Grandma," he said, looking up at her with eyes that held new wisdom alongside their childhood innocence. "Do you think Tyler will ever want to be friends again?" Evelyn smiled down at her grandson, marveling at his capacity for forgiveness despite everything he had endured. "Maybe someday, baby. People can change if they want to, but until then, you just keep being exactly who you are." The green Triceratops rode in Marcus's backpack that night, no longer a source of fear, but once again a symbol of strength and imagination. The toy had survived its own traumatic journey and emerged unchanged in its essential nature. Like its young owner, it remained exactly what it had always been: innocent, joyful, and worthy of protection. In the end, truth had prevailed over lies, justice over prejudice, and community solidarity over individual hatred. The dinosaur incident became a turning point for Jefferson Elementary and the broader community. A reminder that standing up for what is right sometimes requires courage from the smallest and most vulnerable among us. Marcus Thompson had learned early that the world could be unfair and frightening. But he had also learned that it was filled with people willing to fight for justice and protect those who needed protection. The lesson would serve him well in the years to come, as he grew into a young man committed to fairness, equality, and the kind of courage his grandmother had shown in defending him. The plastic triceratops, meanwhile, continued to spark adventures and imagination, proving that some things are too precious and innocent to be destroyed by the cruelty of others. In Marcus's hands, it remained what it had always been, a simple toy that represented the boundless possibilities of childhood dreams.